Coming up next on It's Personal, brought to you by Gundersen Health System, a clinical trial of a new lung cancer drug called Keytruda was actually halted because it was doing so well. We're going to learn more about that and clinical trials in general from a Gundersen Health System oncologist. And also a little bit later, Wellness Fest 2016 is coming up. You're going to learn more about the free event. That's all next on It's Personal, brought to you by Gundersen Health System.
You know, house calls aren't typical anymore. But as a Gundersen cardiologist, I do the next best thing: outreach visits to my patients in rural clinics and hospitals. I love that I can bring care closer to home, especially when they're ill or the weather is not good.
At Gundersen Health System, our doctors go the extra mile, or 60, to provide care for patients. It's the driving force behind love plus medicine. Learn more about Gundersen hospitals and clinics at gundersenhealth.org.
Welcome back to It's Personal, brought to you by Gundersen Health System. I'm Chris Stauffer. Well, there's clinical trials and then there's clinical trials. And recently, results of one clinical trial were so good, they decided to stop the trial altogether and launch it to everybody involved. Here to talk about that is Dr. Oettel, Gundersen Hematology Oncology. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me here, Chris.
So what's going on with the clinical trial? Lung cancer, the topic. Can you just kind of back us up and say, here's what the trial was looking at, and then what happened?
Yeah, so for years and years in lung cancer, the standard treatment has been with a combination of several different drugs for patients who are newly diagnosed. That's been the first line sort of treatment, and that's really not varied a lot over the course of perhaps the past decade. But what we have seen in lung cancer, as well as sort of cancer in general, are a number of new types of drugs, what we call targeted agents, or other drugs called immunotherapy, drugs that really alter the immune system. Most recently, it's been the immunotherapy drugs that have come to the forefront, and we've seen these drugs mostly in what we call the second, third line setting. That is, if you have a cancer and you've been treated for your cancer with several drugs as the first treatment, we call that first line. And when that combination or drugs regimen doesn't work,
go to Plan B.
You go to Plan B. And Plan B has often been another combination of drugs, but we've seen drugs that alter the immune system move into Plan B, where we know that these drugs are the next best thing, I should say, after Plan A. What we're seeing now is some of these drugs are starting to supplant Plan A. They're moving into the first line setting, and that's what this trial was, where patients were evaluated with their newly diagnosed lung cancer, and we basically flipped a coin and said half the patients are going to get the gold standard chemotherapy, the other half are going to get one of these drugs that boosts the immune system, or for lack of a better term, unleashes the immune system. And what we've seen is that patients who get one of these new drugs does better in terms of living longer. And that's huge in lung cancer and huge in cancer in general, because many times when we're looking at new drugs, we're approving them not necessarily because they're making people live much longer, but because they're less toxic. And a drug like this is not only less toxic, but it makes people live longer. So this is the first shot across the bow for first-line therapy.
And I know in speaking with you previously, when you used those words, less toxic, as a physician, as a provider, knowing what some of these drugs are doing, the benefits and yet the side effects, you struggle with that.
Oh, absolutely, because especially when you look at patients who are not necessarily curable, where you're really saying, I'm just here to control this disease and make patients live longer. Quality of life is the bottom line then. Quality of life is the bottom line. So in that situation, then we're saying the side effects of the drugs are everything. So if I say, boy, I'm going to give you this regimen, but yet it's going to come at a cost of nausea, vomiting, fatigue, maybe infection complications, hospitalizations, that doesn't always equate to quality. So sometimes for patients, this is not a good regimen, that is first-line chemotherapy for some people, because of the significant side effects. Yeah. And if I can use a drug that's going to work better and not have the degree of side effects that we see with standard chemotherapy, that's like a win-win.
Now this is for lung cancer, Keytruda.
Great. Keytruda's for lung cancer, but it's interesting because this drug didn't start in lung cancer.
Okay.
This drug started in melanoma, and it graduated to kidney cancer, and it graduated to lung cancer, and it will continue to graduate or move on to other disease sites. And there are other drugs very similar to it. If anyone's picked up a newspaper, watched TV, or looked at a magazine, its comparator drug, nivolumab or Opdivo, is in the same boat and has the same sort of indication. So this Keytruda, or pembrolizumab as we know it, is just one of several different drugs like this.
Wow. So you mentioned some of these others that are out there. This one seeming to make a nice difference for lung cancer patients, which lung cancer historically hasn't gotten a lot of attention.
No, lung cancer hasn't, because one, it's got a lot of stigma to it. It's a cancer that's highly stigmatized because of the smoking association.
You were a smoker, it's your fault.
Exactly.
Good luck.
And yeah, so why are we busting our hump to correct a situation that you have brought on yourself? That's the sort of
thinking and
nihilism that goes along with this drug. But the beauty of this is that you're affecting a lot of people, because lung cancer is the number one killer for cancer patients, and that is far and above breast cancer, colon cancer, melanoma, kidney cancer. You add all those diseases up, they still don't equal the number of deaths that happen in lung cancer.
Do you want to talk about healthcare costs involved then with lung cancer?
That's one of the things I think we struggle with as oncologists now, is that we suddenly have these wildly successful drugs where we haven't seen before, but we're also seeing the high cost of these drugs. This combination, or this drug alone, is somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 a month. How do patients pay for that? How do they, especially if patients who have big copays? The number one cause of bankruptcy is a cancer diagnosis. It's really unfortunate in our society that we are suddenly on the brink of all sorts of new, very successful drugs, but yet the cost of this is astronomical. And as a society, somewhere along the line, we have to come to grips with what can we pay for, what is reasonable. There has to be some logic to getting reasonable care, standard of care, but without becoming financially destitute.
Which, on top of a cancer diagnosis, is absolutely adding to the stress of their diagnosis.
Absolutely, and we know that socioeconomic factors play into how patients do. Interestingly enough, there's a number of, in our literature, there's a lexicon now of financial toxicity, and with that goes a lot of choices that patients make. So if you have a very expensive drug of which you can barely afford, it's easy to skip doses, not take treatment, which really hampers your overall survival. And we're starting to see that. What scares me most, what scares me and excites me most, is that in the future, where I see a lot of these drugs going are combination therapies, much like AIDS, where we looked at AIDS patients in the 80s and 90s and we said, this drug works for you. And then with more research, we found out it wasn't a drug, it was a combination of 3 and 4 drug combinations that do patients the best. We may see that same thing in oncology, where we say this $10,000 drug is good by itself, but it's really good with 3 other drugs, of all of which are 10 grand a month.
So not only though are is the benefit here of obviously saving lives, that being first and foremost, but if we can solve some of these things, then the cost could potentially go down as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And what I foresee is and I really believe this is happening and will happen more so, is we will turn cancer into a chronic disease. I do not believe that cancer in our lifetime is a necessarily curable disease, especially for patients who have metastatic disease. So I'm talking about patients who have cancer spread to other areas. I think we can turn that population into chronic patients who live long, but those patients then become advocates, and that's what we need. We need advocates, and we need advocates beyond the breast world that will advocate for the cost of care.
Part of what you're saying there is many more breast cancer survivors than lung cancer survivors able to advocate for their particular cancer.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one more thing before we move on more to clinical trials about lung cancer and the early diagnosis and how important that is. That's something that I know that you'd like to stress.
Yes. And we're starting to see this now, particularly in screening, because for many years, lung cancer stood as a disease which affected a huge chunk of our population, but we really didn't have a way to detect it early. Unlike colonoscopy for colon cancer or a mammogram for breast cancer, we really didn't have a good test for lung cancer. And over the course of the past 2-3 years, we've really seen CT scans, screening CT scans, low dose, detect early stage lung cancer, where we can cure that disease. We can have patients undergo surgery, take out a section of the lung, and that can be a curable cancer. Whereas, unfortunately, 3/4 of all patients with lung cancer present with distant disease of which is not curable.
We're talking with Dr. Kurt Oettel, a Gundersen Health System oncologist, about how successful some clinical trials are, and that's where I want to go now is clinical trials. How are they made available at Gundersen Health System? Not available everywhere, from what I understand.
Yeah, so clinical trials are generally formed by various groups that get together. In our country, we have basically 4 groups that get together twice a year that we call cooperative groups. And these are scientific people, physicians, researchers, where people sit down and design how we would treat patients with new drugs, combinations of existing drugs, new therapies, put together a trial where we'd say, we think this combination will be better than this combination. And then institutions like ourselves participate or are involved in these cooperative groups, as many other institutions across the country. And we take these trials, and again, this is primarily government supported through the NCI, National Cancer Institute. And institutions like ours, at any given time, will have anywhere from 90 to 120 clinical trials where they're specific for individuals with a certain type of disease or stage of disease. It might be chemotherapy, it might be radiation therapy, it might be surgical techniques, but it's all the sort of cutting edge. And we are fortunate here at this institution to have an administration foundation that is so supportive of clinical trials, as they realize if we are going to make any progress, if we're going to make any advancements in this disease, it is through clinical trials. That's what pushes the field forward.
I think a lot of people out there may have a misconception about the words clinical trial, that it seems almost risky, like I'm a guinea pig.
Yes.
Do you have a conversation with many patients as they come into your
Yes.
office?
Yeah, so a clinical trial is never a guinea pig, because any trial that we have is saying, what is the best treatment available that we know about today? And we say, that is the control arm, that's the standard arm. And then we say, we think, and we have reasonable reason to believe this, we think that there is a better treatment out there, and we're going to flip a coin. We're going to give you what we think is the best treatment versus something that might be better still. That is the essence of clinical trials. So patients are never in a position where we're saying, yeah, here's the best treatment we think, and we're going to flip a coin between that and nothing. That's just not ethical. However, there are trials where nothing is a standard of care. So, for example, many years ago, when we didn't know that giving chemotherapy after surgery for cancer was going to prevent cancer from coming back, when we weren't sure for various diseases, we said the standard of care is to watch you, because we don't know if chemotherapy will make a difference, flipping a coin versus chemotherapy. So, and many of those studies showed that chemotherapy is more effective. Hence, chemotherapy is standard of care for many patients who've had a cancer surgery.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah.
How many clinical trials are out there on cancer, just sort of in generality? And then how many are accessible to patients here at Gundersen?
Like I say, we have about 90 to 120 at any given time, and most of those are NCI or government sponsored. But there's a whole other realm of clinical trials that are what we call pharma sponsored. So a drug company says, hey, I don't like the length of time that it might take for a government trial to get up and running and move. We're just going to do it ourselves. So there's a complementary component to pharma running their own trials. And institutions like ours will pick and choose where we see sort of gaps. So for example, if we don't have a clinical trial for a patient with lung cancer in the third line setting, but a pharma trial is in that setting, we'll say, hey, for our patients to offer them a clinical trial, we'll pick up that trial. And institutions do that all the time. I think, again, you have to have an institution that's big enough that can support that, because it requires a lot of nursing staff, a lot of infrastructure to make that happen, because there's a lot of T's to cross, I's to dot with a clinical trial.
You mentioned offering it to patients. How much are they aware of their options? Is it all about their options, to say, here's the 4 things that we have as potentials for you, or the 2 things, or
well, so unfortunately, across the country, the number of people who actually go on a clinical trial is hovering somewhere between 2 and 5%. You contrast that with pediatric population in the oncology world, and that's hovers somewhere around 70-80%. One of the problems is that for many clinical trials, we have exclusion criteria. So, for example, if you have a heart condition or a kidney problem or an infection problem or something else like that, that might exclude patients from going on trials.
So they wouldn't even be offered.
Correct. Yeah. So when we sit down, we say, what trial are we looking at, and would this patient even be eligible? And unfortunately, too often, patients aren't eligible because of some of the exclusion criteria. And our challenge as physicians is to say, how can we get as many clinical trials available so that we can get patients on trial? So, and then in terms of just having it there, not necessarily convincing the patient, but educating the patient that this is in their best interest to participate in a trial. And oftentimes it's the preconceived notions that like
What we talked about, yeah.
Yeah, it's like they say, well, geez, I'm a guinea pig, and it's a lot of education to inform patients that no, they are not. They're actually
lucky to be able to qualify.
Exactly, exactly, because that's how things change, and that's how we move this field forward. And patients could be, on the cutting edge of this and getting treatment. One, that can be more effective than their current treatment, and two, for drugs that are for drugs on clinical trial, especially drugs that we think are going to work better, that are not FDA approved, those drugs are provided by the clinical trial, so they're getting free drug that way.
Amazing stuff, it
Yeah.
really is. And speaking of moving things forward, I wanted to ask you about where cancer care is going. I'm going to throw you that softball out there, and I'm sure it's things that you probably hear from your colleagues, from your neighbors and other individuals, and that question is very simple. Are we going to solve cancer?
We will solve cancer, but like I say, we will solve cancer in that it will be a chronic disease. It will be a disease that I believe will follow the AIDS pattern. So patients who are diagnosed with AIDS don't necessarily get rid of that disease, although we test for, like, do you have AIDS in your system, and we can't find it. It's just so suppressed that it never sort of manifests itself, and patients can go on and live a normal, productive life without that disease manifesting, but they're still on their chronic therapy. For example, you look at a number of, Magic Johnson, he was diagnosed how many years ago in a very public fashion, and he's living a very productive life, managing a very successful business.
And at the time of the diagnosis, it was thought as a life sentence
absolutely.
for him for a few short years.
I see the same thing happening in cancer, is that we will be treating patients with a drug or combination of drugs, and we won't necessarily see cancer as sort of prevalent on their scan, or we'll see this, but they will live on sort of chronic suppression. That's how I kind of see cancer. But it will happen with many of the drugs and the types of drugs we're using now, which we call targeted therapies, drugs that are uniquely targeted to a specific cancer, and whether that's a combination of drugs that target cancer specifically, or drugs that boost or unleash the immune system, as we've just seen into this trial.
Seems like some really good news.
Oh, it's exciting news. It's an exciting time to be in this field.
All right.
It really is.
All right, trying to put yourself a little bit out of business.
Yeah, yes, yeah. If one day I'm treating heart failure, you'll know we've succeeded.
All right, Dr. Kurt Oettel, Gundersen Health System oncologist. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Chris.
When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Wellness Fest coming up. That's next on It's Personal, brought to you by Gundersen Health System.
Unless you're from Ethiopia, you won't fully understand this, but you might gather that 9-year-old Abo is excited. Thanks to our eye doctors volunteering with Gundersen Global Partners, he can now see his friends at the new school and a future worth living. It's just one of the ways Gundersen Health System is combining love plus medicine. Learn how you can help at gundersenhealth.org/globalpartners.
Welcome back to It's Personal, brought to you by Gundersen Health System. I'm Chris Stauffer. Wellness Fest coming up soon, July 30th at the La Crosse Center. Joining us to talk more about it is Wellness Education Specialist Shayna Schertz from Gundersen Health System. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Wellness Fest. First of all, before we get into what's happening at Wellness Fest, what is Wellness Fest and why?
Wellness Fest is a fun and informative healthy living event. It's really aimed for anyone of all ages. We have external vendors there, and then we also have internal departments.
Oh, yeah,
from
other departments from
Gundersen.
Gundersen Health System coming
Correct.
in to talk more about a healthy lifestyle. A lot of interest in trying to stay healthy, right?
There is, and a lot of times we think of staying healthy as eating healthy and exercising, and there are so many more aspects of leading a healthy life, and this event brings all of those together. We do have a strong focus this year on healthy eating with a celebrity chef that is being brought in and a few other fun tasting demonstrations and such, but otherwise it is an event that focuses on all 7 dimensions of wellness.
Let's talk about this celebrity chef, because this is kind of fun. Chef coming in from the Bravo television network. Can you explain who she is and what she's going to bring to the table, so to speak?
Yeah, so this year we are having Chef Tiffany Derry, brought to us by Novo Nordisk, and she is a season 7 fan favorite and finalist on Top Chef All-Star on Bravo.
Okay. Yeah.
So she'll be creating 2 dishes for participants to try.
Awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun, and obviously they'll be healthy dishes.
Of course,
as
they
well.
will be. They will be healthy dishes.
Not the
yes.
mac and cheese that some people may want when they see a celebrity chef coming to town. But one of the things that is really, I guess you could say, the focus right now is community health. And this is an opportunity to talk about the health of the community and allowing people to just come in and learn.
Right. We will have, like I said, booths set up. People can come in and ask questions if they just have any sort of question about any department within Gundersen. Answer those questions. And like I said, external businesses, some that do have a strong presence of wellness, but some that are just, you can buy facial products, you can buy, some will be selling food products for sale. Just kind of a wide variety of things to do at the event.
Now, this is all coming up on July 30th.
Yes, July 30th, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the La Crosse Center.
All right. Now, how many years have we been doing Wellness Fest? Because this has
think
been
this
going for
is
several
the
years.
5th or the 6th.
Yeah.
It's a few years.
And the idea is to bring in, individuals to do some sampling, to get some free stuff, for goodness sakes. There's lots of different things.
Absolutely. We'll have Chip Magnet. They'll be doing some salsa taste testing. We'll also have some other vendors having food samples. You can bring a non-perishable food item to help local food pantries, as well as we'll even have, again, free bike helmets. Well supplies last to youth this year. So not just the food, but
little safety aspect.
Yeah, exactly.
In there. Anything else for the kids?
Yeah, so we will have the La Crosse Sheriff's Department there, and they will be doing free children's ID cards. So they have a little booth set up. Kiddos can line up and get a free ID card from them.
Now, what's the cost? What does it cost to get into Wellness Fest?
It is free.
All right.
And so, like I said, it's for people of all ages. So everyone, mom, dad, brother, sister, grandparents, anybody can come and attend.
Yeah. Now, when is the chef going to be there? You said it's 9 to 1. Is the chef going to be there for the entirety of the morning, I guess?
Yeah, so she'll be there at 10:30 to do her demonstration.
Okay, 10:30
And that
demonstration.
should last about an hour.
All right, so don't get there late. You
No.
want to check that out. And of course, the free food samples will be there as well. Now, who's putting on Wellness Fest? Is this just a Gundersen Health System event?
It is a Gundersen Health System event, but we also rely on Novo Nordisk and Midwest Family Broadcasting, as well as the Gundersen Medical Foundation.
For help and support to make this all occur.
Support and help, yes.
All right. Wellness Fest coming up on July 30th at the La Crosse Center. And again, Bravo TV's Top Chef will be there at about 10:30, all happening between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. And you cannot beat the price. It's free admission, again, down at the La Crosse Center. Shayna, if I wanted to get more information, how could I get it besides gundersenhealth.org?
You could call 608-775-4717. Otherwise, like you said, gundersenhealth.org/wellnessfest.
All right, there it is. Shayna Schertz, Wellness Education Specialist, and talking about Wellness Fest, coming up on July 30th. Thanks for joining us, Shayna. By the way, if you'd like to learn more about any of the topics on this program, you can go to the Gundersen Health System website. That's gundersenhealth.org. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of It's Personal, brought to you by Gundersen Health System. I'm Chris Stauffer. Thanks for joining us.